Hello everyone. In today's video, we are going to see top 20 question asked in Spring Boot interviews. If you go for any Spring Boot interview, these are the any question you will face in the interviews. So watch this video until the end. You will have any one of the question in your interviews. So first here is what is Spring Boot. So Spring Boot is a framework that simplifies development of Spring-based application by providing default configuration. So Spring provides default configuration, means it is auto configuration framework. It provides embedded server and pre-configured template. Pre-configured template means like JDBC template we can use, REST template we can use. So these are the templates are provided by Spring framework. With the help of this, development will become the easy. So you can directly communicate with the for example, if I have used JDBC template, we can use this JDBC template. With the help of that, we can connect with the database, and it helps creating standalone production ready application with minimal configuration. So just if you are you need to specify few dependencies like Spring Web, Spring API, and MySQL or database connector, and you can ready to go with the Spring Boot application. So it is a minimal configuration. With the help of that, you can develop your application. That is a Spring Boot. The next question here comes is what are the key feature of Spring Boot? If you see, Spring is auto configuration, automatically configure Spring application based on dependencies present in the project. Means if you have added any dependency in your project, that will be automatically configured based on the dependencies. For example, you have added starter form. So inside starter form, you will get some default dependencies. So it will auto configure all the dependencies based on the starter parent. Then embedded server. Spring provide embedded server. It come with embedded Tomcat, JT or Undertow servers. So you don't need to explicitly add your own server. So it is by default added by Spring. So these are the key features. Then Spring Boot CLI. So command line interface for rapid prototyping. Then Spring Boot Starter, it provides predefined template for building various type of application. And Activator provides endpoint that will we can monitor all health of the application. For example, we can heap dump or we can manage, we can check how many objects are present in our applications and how our application is working. That with the help of we can check with the help of Activator. Then next question here is what are the starter of the Spring Boot? So starter are the set of convenient dependency descriptor you can include in your project. For example, Spring Boot starter. Let me go through one project here. Here if you see inside a form.xml, we will have starter form. So in this starter form, we can we will get all the transitive dependency added in the our applications. So based on this starter form, our application will be configured and our dependencies will be managed. Then what is the Spring Boot Activator? So Spring Boot Activator provides production ready features such as monitoring, metrics, health checks, and more through various built-in endpoint like Activator, Health, Activator Metrics. These are the endpoint provided by the Spring Boot Activator. For this, we need to add a Spring Activator dependency in our pom.xml file, and we can ready to go with production ready application. There we can check, we can heap dumps, or we can check objects, we can check matrices, or we can configure any external monitoring tool like Prometheus or Grafana that we can configure. Then what is the auto configuration in Spring Boot? So auto configuration is a feature in Spring Boot that automatically configure your Spring application based on the dependencies you have added, and it attempt to reduce the need of explicit configuration by using convention. So this auto configuration is a feature. With the help of that, we can automatically configure all the our dependencies and we can manage our applications. Let's see one example here. Here I have one application. So here this inside this application we have Spring at the rate Spring Boot annotation. This Spring Boot annotation will consist of at the rate components can at the rate enable auto configuration. So it will enable auto configuration in our application. Then next, how do you configure properties in your Spring Boot? So there are different ways to configure Spring Boot properties. We can mention inside application.properties or application.yml files or environment variables. We can create environment variables in our application. Then command line arguments, with the help of command line arguments also we can configure custom configuration with the @configuration properties annotation. We can configure properties in our Spring Boot application. Then next, what is the use of Spring Boot annotation? So these are the annotation. It is a convenience annotation that combine @configuration, @enable auto configuration, and @component scan into the single annotation, and it mark the main class of the Spring Boot. So inside this, just we have seen it inside Spring Boot application, we have this and component scan. This will scan all the component present inside this package. So once we have created our application, so inside this all the component will be scanned. Then it will enable auto configuration. That will This is the consist of three annotation, that is enable auto configuration, configuration, and component scan. So next question is, how do you disable specific auto configuration classes? So to disable specific auto configuration classes, you can use exclude annotation over the enable auto configuration, or inside our main application also we can use. Here if you see inside main application, we have disabled this user detail service. This is security I have disabled. So with the help of exclude annotation, we can disable auto configuration classes. So this is the consist of three. So we can use here as well. Then next, what is Spring Boot starter parent? So Spring Boot starter parent is a special starter that provide default configuration like dependency management, default plugin configuration for Spring Boot projects. It is typically the parent of the Spring Boot applications. So here if you see, we have this parent, and this consists of some transitive dependencies. Then next, so next question here is, what are the profiles in Spring Boot? So profile in Spring Boot allow you to segregate part of your application configuration and make it available in a certain environments. For example, you have an environment like dev, test, prod. So you are developing application, at that time you will have different environments. For example, you are testing, so you will test on the test environment. You are deploying, so you can deploy your application in the prod environment. Similarly, this environment we can maintain with the Spring Boot profiles. So how we can activate this? So with the help of Spring dot profile dot active properties in our application dot properties file, and we can mention specific which environment we need to use. Then next question is, how can you run Spring Boot application on different ports? So we need to mention in application dot properties file server dot port 8080 9090. Similarly, we can mention any port number on this application dot properties or application dot yml file, and we can run our application on the specific port. Then next is, what is Spring Boot Dev Tool? So Spring Boot Dev Tool is a set of tools that provide better development experience. It will automatically run our application if we made some changes in our application. It includes features like automatic restart. It will automatically restart, live reload, and configuration for faster development. Then how do you handle exception in Spring Boot? So exception handling in Spring Boot can be done using @controller advice. So this is the important annotation in exception handling. It will handle a global exception in our Spring Boot application. So here if you see, and @exception handler to handle exception globally. Custom error responses can be created using response entity exception handler. Then Spring Boot provide default error handling mechanism that return the JSON error response. So it will be provided by default Spring. So what is the purpose of Spring Boot at application.properties or application.yml? These files are used to configure application level setting like server.port, database configuration, logging, any and many other properties is centralized. For example, you want to configure any external properties like LDAP you want to configure, database you want to configure, that you can mention inside this both application.properties or application.yml file. Then question 15 is how does Spring Boot support externalized configuration? So Spring Boot support externalized configuration using properties files, YML files, environment variables, command line argument, and more. This allow you to define different configuration and environment. So with the help of these files, we can maintain external configurations. Then what are the Spring Boot activator metrics? So activator metrics provide insight into the application by collecting various matrices like JVM memory usage. How much memory is used by application, that will be collected by activator matrix. Then CPU usage, HTTP request statistics and more. These matrices can be exposed through endpoint or sent to the external monitoring system. So this is the similar to the previous question. We can use at the rate we can use health, we can monitor health by adding dependencies of activators. Then how do you configure security in Spring Boot application? So security in Spring Boot can be configured using Spring Security. We can use Spring Security, JWT authentication we can use. So you can set up authentication and authorization by including Spring Boot status security dependencies. This dependency we need to add and configuring with @enable web security. This annotation we need to use and extend this annotation at the web security configurer adapter. Then next question here is what is the purpose of REST controller in Spring Boot? So REST controller, whenever we are developing any application with RESTful services, web services, we can use this REST controller annotation. Is a convenience annotation that combines @controller and @response body. It is used to create RESTful web services where each method in the class will return a response body instead of rendering views. So here inside a web application we return the views, but inside REST controller we will have combination of controller and response body, and it is used to create RESTful web services where each method in the class will return response body. Then how do you connect to the database in the Spring Boot? There are simple steps. We to connect database in Spring Boot application, we need to include this Spring Boot starter data JPA. So it will help us to interact with database and configuring the database properties in application dot properties file. So inside application dot properties file, we need to add some configurations. A configuration. Once we have added configuration, this then we can use inside application as well. So this we need to configure with the help of @configuration class. Then next question is what is the difference between component, service, repository, and controller? These all are the stereotype annotation, but this service, repository, and controller are the specialization of the components. So service is the used to define service layer. Repository we can use to indicate that the class is interact with database, and controller is specialization of component used to define a web controller that handle the web requests. These are the some of the commonly asked question in Java Spring Boot interviews. I hope you have gained some knowledge from this video. If you like the content of the video, please like, share, subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching this video, guys.